Welcome to Buenos Aires, 1935. A city of dreams.
Behold, the Paris of South America in its prime. Progress reshapes this metropolis, a vibrant, evolving tapestry.
By the mid-1930s, Buenos Aires was one of the most prosperous and sophisticated cities in the Southern Hemisphere. A metropolis that rivaled European capitals in architectural elegance, cultural life, and urban ambition. They called it the Paris of South America, and in those years, the nickname was no exaggeration. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps and engravings to life, shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists never could have imagined. The goal is not just to look at the past, but to step into it, to walk through Buenos Aires as it once was, and imagine what it might have felt like to stand here at the height of its splendor. And if you stick around until the end, we'll compare these same locations to how they look today, to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we step into the streets of that Buenos Aires, it helps to understand how this city became what it was. By the late 19th century, Argentina had become one of the fastest-growing economies in the world, driven by the export of grains and meats to Europe. That wealth transformed Buenos Aires from a modest colonial town into a cosmopolitan metropolis. The wealthiest families, many of them descendants of the earliest settlers, built palaces and mansions inspired by the great buildings of Paris, hiring French architects, importing marble from Carrara and oak from Slavonia. The city reinvented itself in the image of Europe, and by 1935, that transformation had reached its fullest expression. Avenida de Mayo was the beating heart of that Buenos Aires. Inaugurated in the late 19th century, this thoroughfare connected the Casa Rosada to the National Congress, and along its blocks stood Beaux-Arts buildings with ornate facades, wrought iron balconies, and domes that competed for the porteño sky. On its sidewalks, cafes extended their tables onto the street, and it was there that the social life of the city was woven together. Café Tortoni, founded in 1858 by a French immigrant who wanted to recreate the spirit of its Parisian namesake, was the epicenter of intellectual bohemia. In its basement, the literary gathering known as the Peña brought together poets, painters, and musicians who would define Argentine culture in the 20th century. Borges, Alfonsina Storni, Quinquela Martín, they all passed through those oak and green-veined marble tables. Just a few blocks away, the Teatro Colón rose as the ultimate symbol of Argentine cultural aspirations. Inaugurated in 1908 after 20 years of construction, this opera colossus combined influences from the Italian Renaissance, German solidity, and French grace in a unique architectural synthesis. Its horseshoe-shaped auditorium, with a capacity of nearly 3,000 spectators, was considered one of the finest in the world for its exceptional acoustics. In 1935, the greatest voices of international opera graced its stage, and the porteño elite dressed up to attend performances that rivaled those of La Scala in Milan or the Paris Opera. The marble, bronze, and gilding of its interiors testified to an era when Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. To the north of the city, the Recoleta neighborhood represented the highest refinement of that porteño society. After the yellow fever epidemic of 1871, the wealthiest families had abandoned the southern neighborhoods to settle in this elevated and ventilated area. By the 1930s, Avenida Alvear was a parade of palaces and petite hotels designed by French architects with materials imported directly from Europe. The Palacio du Jau, completed just a year earlier in Louis XVI style, was among the most splendid, inspired by the Château du Marais in Paris. Neighboring it, The residences of the Ancorena, Pereda, and Ortiz Basualdo families formed an architectural ensemble that had nothing to envy from the most elegant districts of the French capital. At the heart of Recoleta, the cemetery of the same name held the remains of Argentine aristocracy in mausoleums that were true works of art in marble and bronze. Each vault told the story of a family, a fortune, a lineage. Beside it, the Church of Pilar, one of the oldest in the city, with its whitewashed walls and Baroque altarpieces, offered a serene contrast to the surrounding opulence. On Sundays, high society families strolled through the gardens designed by Carlos Thays, the French landscape architect who had transformed the green spaces of Buenos Aires before taking tea at one of the nearby confectionaries. Tango, meanwhile, had completed its transformation from music of the slums to an international phenomenon. In 1935, Carlos Gardel was the greatest idol of Argentine popular music, a star whose fame stretched from New York to Paris. That year, he filmed his last movies in American studios, including The Day You Love Me, which would become a classic. The Morocho del Abasto, as they called him after the neighborhood where he had grown up, embodied the social ascent that Buenos Aires promised to the immigrants who arrived on its shores. His voice had carried tango from seedy cafes to the most elegant salons in the world. No one knew then that in June of that same year, a plane crash in Medellin would silence that prodigious voice forever. Tango orchestras filled dance halls throughout the city. The Palais de Glace in Recoleta, originally built as an ice skating rink, had become one of the temples of the genre, with its perfect acoustics and circular dance floor where couples executed the steps that the world would later imitate. In the more working-class neighborhoods, cafes and cabarets offered their own versions of porteño music, while radios carried it into every home. It was the golden age of tango, when every corner seemed to have its own orchestra and every neighborhood its own poet of the arrabal. But Buenos Aires was not just culture and elegance, it was also a city of commerce and industry. To the east, the red brick docks of Puerto Madero, built at the end of the previous century, stored the grains that departed for Europe. Although by then the port had already become obsolete, replaced by Puerto Nuevo further north, its English-style warehouses still formed part of the riverfront landscape. Cranes rose above the piers, and cargo ships constantly came and went, testimony to an economy that, despite the world crisis of 1929, remained one of the most vigorous in the Americas. In 1935, the city was undergoing a major urban transformation. Mayor Mariano de Vedia y Mitre had initiated an ambitious modernization plan that included widening Avenida Corrientes and opening the future Avenida 9 de Julio. There was already talk of erecting an obelisk at the intersection of these arteries, a monument that would celebrate the 400th anniversary of the first founding of Buenos Aires. The Plaza de la República was beginning to take shape, and the following year would see the inauguration of that symbol that would become the most recognizable postcard of the city. It was a time of grand projects, when Buenos Aires looked to the future with the confidence of one who knows itself to be part of the developed world. Calle Florida was the obligatory promenade of the porteño bourgeoisie. Pedestrianized for decades, its mosaic sidewalks filled every afternoon with elegant ladies, gentlemen in hats, and children with their nannies. The shops displayed the latest fashions from Paris, and the confectionaries served tea with fine pastries, while orchestras enlivened the vermouth hour. The confiteria ideal, with its Belle Époque decor and soaring ceilings, was one of the favorite meeting spots. There, among mirrors and gilded moldings, business deals were struck, romances were plotted, and the gossip of the day was discussed. At the southern end of the city, the La Boca neighborhood retained its character as an immigrant port. The sheet metal houses painted with leftover colors from the ships gave the place that unique appearance that endures to this day. The conventillos, or tenement houses, sheltered working families, many of them Italians who had arrived seeking fortune and had found a new homeland. In the taverns, Genoese songs mixed with tangos, and the riachuelo, dark and hard-working, remained the artery through which the products that fed the national economy entered and departed. Imagine walking through those streets in 1935. The air smells of freshly brewed coffee and the jasmine that adorns the balconies of Barrio Norte. Trams cross the avenues with their characteristic bell ringing, and automobiles, still a novelty for many, share the space with horse-drawn carts. On the corners, newsboys shout the headlines of the day, while shoeshine boys offer their services to gentlemen on their way to their offices. It is a city that lives by day and by night, that works and that dances, that dreams of Europe, but is profoundly American. The Caverna building, inaugurated just a few months earlier, rose above Plaza San Martin as testimony to Argentine modernity. At 120 meters tall, it was the tallest reinforced concrete skyscraper in South America, a marvel of local engineering designed in Art Deco style. Its stepped silhouette dominated the city skyline, visible from kilometers away. Karina Kavanagh, the Irish millionaire who had commissioned its construction, lived on the 14th floor in a 700-square-meter apartment with views of the river and the gardens that Carlos Teix had designed decades before. Now, I want to bring you into the present and show you how these places look today. Thanks for being here, and if you have ideas or requests for future cities, share them in the comments. Let's get into it. The Teatro Colón remains one of the most important opera houses in the world. Its interiors were restored for Argentina's bicentennial in 2010, and today it welcomes the same great figures that visited it nearly a century ago. The acoustics that amazed music lovers in 1935 are still considered exceptional. The streets surrounding it have changed. Avenida 9 de Julio carved its way through by demolishing entire city blocks, but the theater remains, guardian of an uninterrupted cultural tradition. The obelisk, which in 1935 was merely a project, has become the most recognizable symbol of Buenos Aires. Its 67 meters of concrete mark the intersection of Avenidas Corrientes and 9 de Julio, the point where the city celebrates its sports triumphs and where the incessant traffic reminds us that this is still a vibrant metropolis. Around it, the buildings from that era coexist with modern towers in that mix of styles that characterizes the Argentine capital. The palaces of Recoleta have had diverse fates. Some became embassies, like the Palacio Pereda, that today houses the Brazilian representation, or the Ortiz Basualdo, that serves as the French embassy. The Palacio Duhau was transformed into a luxury hotel, but it preserves its original salons, its gardens, and that atmosphere of elegance that defined Porteño aristocracy. Others were not so fortunate and were demolished to make way for apartment buildings, victims of real estate progress. Café Tortoni remains open on Avenida de Mayo, with its same oak tables and walls covered with paintings and caricatures. Tourists line up to enter, seeking the spirit of that bohemia that brought Borges and Gardel together under the same roof. Tango plays every night in its basement, as it has played for nearly a century, reminding us that some traditions survive all crises. Puerto Madero, that abandoned port of brick docks, underwent a radical transformation at the end of the 20th century. Its warehouses were recycled into restaurants, offices, and luxury lofts, and glass towers rose where grain silos once stood. It is today one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, with its pedestrian bridges and parks facing the river. The same bricks that watch ships laden with wheat depart for Europe are now the backdrop for evening strolls and elegant dinners. I do really appreciate you watching. Your ideas, input, and constructive feedback really do shape what comes next. Feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time.